So let's just recap quickly. Jesus is arrested somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m. in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's taken to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. He's convicted of blasphemy, even though what he said was the absolute truth. He's then blindfolded. His face is spit on, perhaps by the entire Jerusalem council, but definitely by the private security of Caiaphas who had arrested him. And they start punching him with their fists repeatedly, maybe for up to 2 hours. He's blindfolded and he's getting hit and punched all over his body from all different directions from various people and spat on. Then he's taken to Pilate, who tries for maybe an hour at the most to say, you know what? I don't think this guy's done anything wrong. I'm not going to crucify him. He looks for ways to get Jesus off the hook, but eventually he agrees to scourge Jesus when the people say, we don't want Barabbas. We don't want Barabbas. We want this guy to be crucified. What did Jesus' scourging entail? Let me read to you. This is where it gets brutal. Let me read to you what D.A. Carson, who's an excellent New Testament scholar, who's still living, by the way, one of my favorite New Testament scholars, says about what scourging entailed. We're talking about Roman scourging. Just so you know, a little background. Among the Jewish people, scourging or beating was limited to 40 lashes. Okay, 40 lashes with a whip. But the Romans had no such limits. Romans could scourge a victim until the men performing the scourging had exhausted their strength. So you could have up to 3 guys scourging a single person, and they could go for as long as they wanted. But once they had nothing left in them to give, then it stopped. Now, scourging was not an easy thing to do because you were using a heavy whip that had bones on the end of it. I'm about to read to you what was used to scourge people, but you're wielding this thing with all your might. So guys eventually got tired and didn't want to keep going. But by the time that happened, especially if there were multiple people performing the scourging, oftentimes the victim was already dead. Oftentimes what would happen is that their skin would be ripped from their body so graphically, so violently, that people's organs would actually fall out, and you could actually see the internal organs and the bones of people, bare bones. That's how much you weren't just ripping skin off, you were ripping skin, muscle, cartilage, everything. People were literally, I'm sorry if this is graphic, but this is what Jesus endured. They were literally ripped to death using these flagellums that Romans used to scourge people. So let me read to you what D.A. Carson says about this. They used a flagellum made by plating pieces of bone or lead into leather thongs. So heavy stick with leather strings coming off of it that pieces of sharp bone and lead are tied to, basically attached to. The victim was stripped and tied to a post. Severe flogging reduced the flesh to a bloody pulp and could open up the body until the bones were visible and the entrails exposed. As an independent punishment, it frequently ended in death, but was often used to weaken the prisoner before execution. Which was it in the case of Jesus? Well, Jesus is scourged before he's given up to be crucified. So how badly he was scourged, we don't know. We just know that anybody who was scourged by the Romans was in bad shape afterward. They usually did not live if they survived the scourging itself. They usually didn't live for very long afterward. So after Jesus is scourged by the Romans, after he's been punched repeatedly and spat on repeatedly by the Jewish security of the high priest, he's then given over to the Roman soldiers, who gather an entire battalion of men to mock him, to beat him, and to spit on him. These people must have been demonically and satanically inspired. They must have been the type of people who took pleasure in other people's pain. Those are satanically inspired forces. There's no human being on earth who takes pleasure in somebody else's pain unless they are demonically influenced. As bad as our sin nature is, you have to be demonically influenced in order to actually take pleasure in people's pain. These men who did this to Jesus obviously took great pleasure in it because they all wanted to be a part of it. An entire battalion of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him to mock him because purple was the color of kings. And they jam a crown of thorns on his head. I like in movies like The Passion that this is actually depicted realistically, because people think it was just little rose thorns, which, as if that's not bad enough. Rose thorns are sharp, and if you prick your finger on one, they hurt. Having an entire crown of those put on your head would be incredibly painful and torturous. These were probably big, thick thorns that were jammed onto his head. Then they mocked him by giving him a reed, which would have been like a wooden staff, to say, oh, you're the king of the Jews. Hail, king. Look, you got your purple robe. You got your crown. Here's your staff. But it was all just a mockery, because then they took the staff out of his hand and started striking him repeatedly on the head with it. Imagine someone hitting you repeatedly on the head with a wooden beam. I mean, we're talking thicker than a broomstick here. Would that in and of itself be enough to kill you? It could. All of this, all these things that Jesus endured could have on their own resulted in his death easily. But it wasn't until Jesus gave up his spirit that he actually died. So how long did this go on for? Well, if Jesus is delivered to Pilate between 6 and 6:30 and he's on the cross by 9, there's a chance that the scourging and the mockery in and of itself went on for a couple of hours. And Jesus's body would have been ripped to shreds in that amount of time. And he would have been completely physically unrecognizable. He would have been unrecognizable. He endured everything he went through to take our transgressions and the punishment that we endured, that we deserved, that we warranted, on himself, and then take it with him to the cross and kill it as his own life was given up. That's the reason for all of this. The reason for all of this that Jesus endured was to take your sins and the punishment for them off of you, and to cover you, wash you clean with his spilled blood, so that you could have full and unfettered access to God. That's the point. That's the point of all this. Thanks for watching. My name's Blake, and over the past 20 years, I've been a missionary, a pastor, and a Bible college and seminary professor. During that entire time, I've been teaching the Bible. And if you want more Bible content to come your way, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video, and also check out this video right here.